Bear down $87.5 million. That is the number shaking Halas Hall right now. And if you don't understand why that number changes the entire landscape in Chicago this year, then you need to stay until the end of this video, because what's coming is going to completely redefine how Ryan Poles is building this roster around Caleb Williams. Adam Schefter just reported the three-time Pro Bowler, the most dominant interior defensive lineman in the NFC East over the last half-decade, has formally requested a trade out of New York. 28 years old, the absolute prime of his career, and available right now. Bleacher Report already has the Bears listed as one of the top destinations. And the tactical argument is real, because this franchise surrendered the sixth most rushing yards in the entire league during 2025. Sixth. In a league where controlling the line of scrimmage is the difference between winning divisions and watching the playoffs from your couch, that is a bleeding wound that Ryan Poles has to stop. But while that trade conversation is exploding across the entire market, Halas Hall is sending another message, one aimed directly inside the locker room, and some players sitting on expiring rookie deals better be reading that message very carefully this week. And just when you think you've figured out where Poles is taking his master plan in this draft, there's a financial argument that nobody in the Windy City is calculating yet, one that could completely flip the final decision on whether Chicago crosses that $87.5 million threshold or walks away from the table before the Giants even pick up the phone. All of that is in this video. If you are part of the Real Bear Nation and you trust the Ryan Poles process, drop a like right now and subscribe to the channel. Bear down. All right, let's start with the biggest story of the day. Dexter Lawrence, three-time Pro Bowl selection, one of the most dominant interior defensive linemen in the NFC East over the last 5 years, has officially requested a trade from the New York Giants. And listen, Adam Schefter's report left zero room for interpretation. Lawrence wants out of New York, and the reason is simple. Multiple years of failed contract extension talks. The man is 28 years old, he's in the prime of his career, and he is not about to keep suiting up for a franchise that can't or won't pay him what he's worth, and that's exactly where Chicago enters the picture. Bleacher Report already listed the Bears as one of the top landing spots for Lawrence, and the tactical argument is real. Chicago gave up the sixth most rushing yards per game in the entire league in 2025. Sixth, in a league where winning the line of scrimmage separates division winners from teams watching the playoffs on TV. That is a wound that Ryan Poles has to close. Now, how much would it cost? This is where it gets interesting. ESPN's Jordan Raanan says the general consensus across the league is somewhere between a late first-round pick and a second-round pick. SNY's Connor Hughes is hearing similar things, possible packages including a late 2026 first, a 2027 first, or a second-round pick with additional compensation. Some teams believe a standalone second could get it done. Others put Lawrence's value closer to a late first. For the Bears, that range is workable. We're not talking about gutting the vault. We're talking about a specific draft slot that Poles can move if he truly believes Lawrence is the missing piece. But hold on, because not everyone agrees this is the right move. There's a legitimate argument on the other side. If Chicago gives up a second or a late first, plus a contract north of $30 million a year, you're basically replacing a draft pick that historically averages 48 disruptive plays over 5 years with a player who had 0.5 sacks last season. 0.5, that is not a Pro Bowl interior defender. That is a player who was either hurt, checked out, or both. And here's the part that really has me going back and forth. Every explanation for that production drop is a red flag. Connor Hughes reported there was a belief around the league that Lawrence's work ethic was not great and that he was not in shape. And the Giants were a total organizational disaster, which doesn't help anybody's numbers. Can that be fixed with a change of scenery? Possibly. Ben Johnson, a competitive roster with Caleb Williams, a front office that actually knows what it's doing. That environment could absolutely wake up a player who tuned out in a toxic situation. Keep it a buck, I think Lawrence is more a situation problem than a talent decline. His PFF pass rush grade last season was 84.5. That is not a broken player. That is a player who stopped running in run defense because the motivation or the conditioning wasn't there, and in the right system, that flips. But should Chicago go a first-round pick deep for him? That's where I pump the brakes. A second with something extra, yes. A late first if the entire coaching staff is locked in, maybe. But Poles has been strategic and disciplined all offseason. If there's one thing this front office has shown us, it's that they do not panic buy, and they should not start now. What they should do is pick up the phone today, establish the real price, figure out if the contract structure works without destroying the cap flexibility, and if the numbers line up without damaging the draft future, pull the trigger. Because if Lawrence comes back and plays like the 2022 and 2023 version of himself next to Gervon Dexter on that interior, bro, that is over 650 pounds of pure chaos in the heart of that defensive front. That changes how opposing offensive coordinators have to build their game plans against Chicago. That frees the linebackers. That creates interior pressure without blitzing. That is like putting a turbocharger on everything Ben Johnson wants to build on the defensive side of the ball. But if he comes back looking like the 2025 version, Poles will have spent premium draft capital and top-of-market cap space on a player who couldn't or wouldn't perform at the level of his contract, and that cost you a year inside Caleb Williams' championship window. History says teams that trade more than a second-rounder for a defensive player in the modern CBA era end up worse off twice as often as they come out ahead. That's not a minor footnote. The Packers, the Colts, the Cowboys all went all in last year. None of them moved forward. All of them gave up high-value picks. None of them improved their win total. Poles knows that math, and if he knows it, he's going to act accordingly. All right. While all that trade conversation is developing, the Bears front office is also sending some very clear internal messages, signals that certain players on this roster should be reading very carefully right now. The Chicago Bears have a scheduled 30 visit with Miami Hurricanes cornerback Keontae Scott. Jordan Schultz reported that Chicago is one of 3 teams meeting with Scott this week, and y'all don't understand, that is not a coincidence. Scott's resume turns heads. 64 tackles, 5 pass deflections, 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 touchdowns. All ACC. This is not a coverage-only corner who just sits in his zone. This is a player who finds the football and makes plays. He also has special teams return experience, including a punt return touchdown back in 2023 when he was at Auburn. For a team that just lost Nahshon Wright and Kevin Byard, 2 players who had a genuine nose for the football in this secondary, Scott fits the profile of what this defense needs going forward. But the most important part of this story isn't Scott himself. It's what this scheduled visit tells Tyreek Stevenson. Stevenson got off to a strong start in 2025 when Jaylon Johnson and Kyler Gordon were both out with injuries. And for a moment, it looked like he was going to lock down that CB2 role for real. But by the end of the season, he had completely vanished from the defense. No snaps, invisible. And for a player approaching the end of his rookie deal, that is a massive problem. If Scott comes in and plays the way he did at Miami and Auburn, he can own that CB2 spot for the next 4 or 5 years. Stevenson needs to look at this visit for what it is. Real competition is knocking on his door in the Windy City. Should Chicago spend a first or second on Scott, that's going to split the fan base. But if Ryan Poles genuinely believes Stevenson is not a starter caliber corner on a Super Bowl roster, then you bring the competition early. Better to figure it out now than to be scrambling in September. And speaking of long-term roster building, there's a conversation that keeps gaining momentum about exactly how Poles should handle this draft class on the defensive side of the ball. Look, we already broke down why Lawrence makes sense, but we have to give the counter-argument its space because it holds real weight and deserves to be heard. Josh Sunderbruck over at Windy City Gridiron ran the full analysis, and his conclusion is clear. If the price goes above a second-round pick, the Bears need to walk away. The reasoning is both financial and roster construction based at the same time. A player drafted in the back half of the first round at that position averages 48 disruptive plays in his first 5 seasons with over 15 sacks. Lawrence at his best has a slightly better rate, 12.2 disruptive plays per year versus 9.6 for the average prospect, 4.4 sacks per year versus 3. The edge exists, but it is not massive. And if you remove his 2025 outlier season entirely, that advantage nearly disappears. On top of that, the contract cost Lawrence is at $22.5 million per year. A second-round draft pick is around $4.5 million annually. That gap is enough to sign an edge rusher or an impact linebacker in free agency. You're not just giving away a pick, you're giving away a pick plus the cap flexibility to add another impact player to this roster. Poles built this organization through discipline, not through desperation moves. And if there's one thing that separates this front office from the previous regimes at Halas Hall, it is exactly that patience and process. Make the call, establish the price. But if the Giants want a young first-rounder or a package that drains Chicago's draft capital, the answer has to be no, and it should not be a hard decision to make. This is exactly what makes this Bears offseason so completely addictive. We're not talking about surviving anymore. We're talking about attacking, about building something real around Caleb Williams before the 2026 season kicks off. Does Lawrence end up on the navy and orange? I honestly don't know yet. Does Scott bump Stevenson out of the starting lineup? That depends on how the draft plays out. But what I do know is that Ryan Poles is looking at the entire board and making decisions with his brain, not with panic. That is all we want from our people at Halas Hall. Be smart, be aggressive where it counts, and do not give away the future for a shiny name. If this breakdown fired you up, drop that like right now and tell me down in the comments, do you close the deal on Dexter Lawrence or do you let him walk? Bear down. I'll see you tomorrow.